Good evening. I'd like to call the Town of Delafield Board of Supervisors meeting for Tuesday, September 10th to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you'll call the roll, Administrator Green.
Supervisor Mahoney-Ogden.
Present.
Supervisor Miller.
Here.
Supervisor Wolfley. Present. Chairman Kranek.
Present.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, item 4, citizens' comments. Public comments from citizens regarding items on or not on the agenda. The board may not engage in discussion with the citizens making the comment. Individual presentations are limited to 3 minutes, and citizens shall follow the rules set forth in section 2.04, paren 1, paren D of the Town Code. Anybody like to make any public comments? Seeing none, I'm going to close the citizen comment period and move to the approval of the August 27th, 2024 Town Board minutes.
Motion to approve August 27th, 2024 Town Board minutes.
The second with an amendment to change the motion under the 8th order of business to motion by Supervisor Michaels under 8th order as opposed to Steve. Seconded.
Motion and a second with the amendment to make that update. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next item, actions on vouchers submitted for payment. There are no amendments to the 2024 budget, so I'd look for a motion on accounts payable and payroll.
Motion to approve payment of checks 67909 through 67942 in the amount of $50,030.16, and payroll checks approve dated September 13th, 2024, the amount of $16,565.63.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve accounts payable and payroll. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Next item, communications, would be a possible Lake Country Fire Board update. We were all at Kettle Moraine last week, and sounds like the next steps are, per an email that I got this afternoon from the chief, is he wants to have the elected officials and the administrators meet on Tuesday, the 24th at the Whale Station at 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's the update I got on that.
I'm sorry, so that was all?
No, just the chair and presidents and,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Thank you.
So that's all I got on that. Next item, unfinished business, discussion of possible action on a residential lighting ordinance. This was tabled at our last meeting, and I recommend that we leave it on the table as staff is still working through the issue.
When are we discussing it again? Do we have it a date?
Probably in the next meeting.
Next item is new business, discussion of possible action on a recommendation from the Plan Commission to approve the following zoning code changes. The first one is the recommendation to adopt ordinance XX-XX, an ordinance.
I don't have the ordinance drafted yet. It's still with the attorney, so really it would just be whether if we approve it, we just do a motion to approve the change,
Okay.
Subject to the attorney's final review of the ordinance. I apologize for that.
All good. So it would be a recommendation from the Plan Commission to adopt an ordinance to amend our section 17.04 5M.5D of the zoning code to reduce the open space requirements in the M1 zoning district from 65% to 55%. Does the administrator or the town engineer have any overview or any?
Yeah, just a brief update, and Tim can speak to this as well. It was recommended by the Plan Commission on a vote of 4-2 to approve a change to the M1 zoning district to change the open space requirements from 65% to 55% by the request of John Burgett, who's looking to potentially do conditional use for an operation on the site. Staff has explained in Tim's memo as well that surrounding communities have much less strict requirements for their M1 zoning open space requirements. And everyone that we looked at, and I think we looked at half of them in the county and all of the townships are much less restrictive. Not necessarily a reason to approve, but just something to keep in mind from staff's level. And I believe Tim's report had a staff recommendation to approve, and that's what's before you tonight for discussion and possible action.
So can I ask a question?
Okay, go. Yeah, I have a question too. Go
So
ahead.
the reasoning why the planning commission is recommending this change is because other communities surrounding us are not as strict? Understanding that correctly?
I don't know if there was a reason given as to the approval. I don't think that was part of the motion. I just know that was part of the discussion. Yes.
Yeah,
So-
part of the discussion was it was recommended by staff to approve it, and then looking at it, we're still the town of Delafield. We're still the strictest open space when it comes to M1 zoning. At the end of the day, this really applies to two properties in the town. The auto dealership off of Highway 16, and this property just on the other side of We Energies, which is barely in the town. You're almost in Summit at that point. And I think that, allowing this reduction as requested by the petitioner will allow for a higher quality build. And we're still the town, and we're still more restrictive than our neighbors. So I don't see it being detrimental to the
Tim, I don't know if you might be able to provide some background on what the M1 zoning district used to be.
Thank you, that was my question. yeah.
Given that We Energies is well above that as far as their open space.
Yeah, in the, what I'll call the old code, which is the pre-1998 code, we didn't have open space or green space. We had floor area ratio. And the floor area ratio for M1 was at 50%. So that didn't take into account. So the building versus the larger parcel would be that 50%. The floor area of the building versus the entire parcel, not taking into account parking, sidewalks, patios, things like that. And so at that time when the code was changed from floor area ratio, all the districts went to an open space, or we call it open space, kind of defined as green space at that time. And at that time, we determined percentages for each one, but I honestly cannot remember. It's been a while.
Why?
Can't remember
Okay.
why the 65% was the number that we came up with. So it might, I don't know if there's, I tried to figure out if there was a reason to do it because of the floor area ratio, but it still doesn't kind of work out if you think, well, if a building's on there plus parking, what's left? It's going to be less than 50% for the most part of green space out there. You look confused. I'm saying if you take the floor area plus the parking,
Yep.
it's going to be, less than we would have less green space under the old code, shall we say. So once again, I don't remember how we got to the 65%, but that was our number. A lot of the residential was at 85%. Even A2 was at 92%. So a lot of the residential is a lot higher versus the business districts are, like our B1 business district is actually 50%. And that's our general business district. So that would be, we don't have a whole lot of that. That would be Glendale Farms. It would be the one across from the old town hall. I can't think of the name of that right off the top of my head, but those are our B1 districts that we have right now, and they're at 50% open space. So even at 55%, we're greater than 50%. We're still higher than a lot of the other communities. So when it came in, it seemed like a reasonable request. The developer of the land came in with a plan that laid out the buildings that they want to put in for its storage buildings. It still would have to go through a conditional use. But when they lay out the buildings, and there's some wetlands and some environmental areas to the north, but when they lay out the building, it seems like 55% works for them. That's kind of how the 55% number was determined, is more based on what they brought in as a potential development.
Do we have a plan of what it would be? Did you do a drawing of what it would be at 55? What's really the layout difference between 65 and 55, or what's the plan? If, I mean, I know you asked for the bigger amount, but what would happen if what's the plan at 55?
I'll defer to them on that. So.
Good evening, thanks. I'm Al Hulick, and I'm here representing Mr. John Burgett, who's seated out there. He's the developer owner of the property. To answer your question directly, if the green space open requirement stayed at 65%, it would essentially take our project and shrink it down, and it would be very likely be a much less viable project. So, just like a lot of things, especially in warehousing, the space is what carries the value. And more space you get, the higher value you can create from a taxing jurisdiction, as well as value to the, inevitable users. So 65 put us in a position where it may not have been a viable project. 55 did put us in a viable project in terms of floor plan, square footage, rental rates, things of that nature. So we didn't draw out a 65% plan because we started this discussion with Mr. Barbeau and Mr. Green, months ago, if not, maybe even last year, honestly. And through those discussions, their request to us, which was a reasonable request, is, well, show us what you want to do so we've got something to react to. So Plan Commission has something to react to. So the Board of Supervisors has something to react to. So we drew the plan at 55. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but,
I didn't get a chance to see any of that, so do you have a copy of it with
Oh,
you?
sure. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I didn't know if it was in the packet or not. John just brought a poster board in with that on there, actually. So we knew we'd have to come back for the conditional use in the site plan, so, yeah.
While he's grabbing that, I know that I was interested for a discussion on it. I've actually been thinking about it a ton because and I know, it passed, but we said it didn't pass unanimously. I got this feeling, I don't know, Joe, you were sitting there next to me, Supervisor Wolfley, that I kind of got the impression, because it wasn't unanimous, but they knew it was going to get to a discussion level at our end. So I think they passed it knowing that we were going to probably be discussing it. I know Supervisor Michaels had an opinion on it, and he voted against it. I was looking forward to hearing his rationale, but he's not here, so I guess we're going to go on without it. So it'd be helpful, Supervisor Miller, to see what they've got going here, so you can.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll hold it up here if that's okay. I don't know how the recording is working. So in general, it is kind of an oddly shaped parcel, and you see this line that bisects it here. That's actually where the county zoning applies, and in this area here, a lot of this area is floodplain, so it's undevelopable anyways. So at first glance, it's like, okay, 65% isn't all that difficult to get to, but, it leaves us with the inability to really kind of develop this half of the site. So, but for the 55%, but for the 10% reduction, this whole section probably doesn't happen, and we're just left with this. And at that point, it's no longer viable from a cash flow analysis. So what we have here is a two-phase development. We've got the 4 buildings that are shown in gray, and then a proposed building 3 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that gets us up against, kind of this floodplain area, and we're, have our storm water shown there. So just a single entrance, internal circulation, single exit, onto the highway. So that's kind of just a general overview. Does that help?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, no, yeah, okay,
Okay.
thank
The
you.
10% change allows for an additional 4 buildings?
Yeah.
In the back that you're not going to see. There, I mean,
Right.
the layout
Well,
from
yeah,
the
no, I-
road
I-
is going to be the same regardless.
Yeah.
10% for buildings? I mean, it just seems like a big.
Yeah, because once you, once you start to bisect these buildings, I'm not exactly sure, where the 55 and 65% line is, but essentially these buildings, he has developments kind of all around the state, kind of follows the same patterns, it follows the same, development practices. And if you can't get a building a certain size, it's kind of all or nothing, if that makes sense. So yes, could we shrink the buildings? Potentially. then you start to lose units or shrink the size, they're not as viable, they're not as marketable.
So on the other side of that line, that's county zoning, right? What's the county's requirement for?
70% floor area ratio?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like very little open space.
Yes.
That's very little open space.
Yeah.
I guess the, and I know this doesn't pertain to you guys, but the other property that would impact this being the car dealership. So what's the difference then that then is available on that property, right? This has got some wetland and parts that are kind of undevelopable. And I believe the car dealership does as well, I think.
I think Engineer Barbeau can answer that question better,
yeah,
but I believe we're.
So that property, right now, the car dealership itself is a separate lot, and it's operated under a conditional use.
Right.
Under M1. And that's basically because M1 doesn't allow outside storage, but obviously vehicles being outside are outside storage. So they had, and that's been a long-term conditional use out there. So then the lot to the east was going to be like storage type or garage type condos. And we've heard that it's likely not going to go through anymore. We haven't heard
There's a
officially.
for sale sign on there, so.
Yeah, I saw that one, yeah. So I think that they are trying to get rid of that. So that opens up that piece of land to at least that vacant piece of land to potentially 55%, open space.
Right.
Which allows a little bit more robust development on there. If they can fit it on there, that's a challenging site because there are wetlands near Highway 16. And then to the north, you go up the hill towards JK, So there's not a lot to the north. It's a little bit more challenging to develop, I would say. So you're, I don't know if
Yeah, I
answered
mean,
your
it's just,
question on that,
it's, I mean, I guess, I don't know, I look at the battle we went through to, lessen density and things with a former commercial property across the highway, and then like turn around to immediately increase density on commercial property pieces. And I guess had everything been like, if everything was developed or everything was in the works of being developed, or if I had a better picture of like what impact that is, I'd be a little more comfortable saying yes, because I know you didn't draw up an image of something with the 55% coverage, right? I get that. I'm guessing with 55%, you'd still probably have a building or two theoretically. It just, you wouldn't have done the whole project, right? Right. So at 55%, would it have, say we're like, nope, and you're maxing it out, right? 55%, does that get you 6 buildings and the extra 10% gets you the 2 more buildings, or is it like?
I think that's probably pretty safe. I think that's probably pretty safe. The other thing with this site, because of its unique shape, again, and I mentioned this at the plan commission level, and so excuse me for repeating myself, from your position, what does this site lend itself to? I mean, it's an M1 site. I've looked at your zoning ordinances for M1, and the 65%. Okay, if you're going to build on this site, you're going to need to build on the front half of it to be cost effective, to have vantage point for the street, running utilities. So, if you're going to build another, let's say another use comes along, another appropriate M1 use, and they're already pinched with this narrow kind of narrow throat here, and a 65% green space requirement. I don't know what else would or could develop on a site like this with that type of green space requirement, because you have to kind of build towards the front. So you'd have to build kind of a long shoebox if it's a traditional M1 industrial type zoning building, and that's just not conducive in today's development world to build a long, skinny building. So as I mentioned at the planning commission level, if I was in your seat, I would ask, okay, if not this, then what? And I had the same kind of thought as I was driving around today. This really comes down to density is essentially what this is really about. So, take our development off the table and you're left with 2 vacant sites that are M1 zoning, in your community is what it sounds like to me. And, what is the likelihood or probability of development occurring on either of those sites with the current regulations? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Been doing economic development for 20 years. I kind of know, when I see things, okay, what makes sense here, what doesn't make sense here. There's options for this site, but it's gonna be challenging beyond this type of development. And even this was challenging at a 65%. We're typically used to a 30% green space requirement. I mean, that's typically what we see in and around the state. So that was, that was an eye popper when we saw that, and that's why I called Dan up right away and I said, am I reading this correct? Is this a floor area ratio, 65%? Understanding it's township zoning, different than kind of more of an urban setting. But, it comes down to what are the options available to the town of Delafield if this wasn't on the table. And sure, you could maybe get a gas station or something up front, but I don't know that they would want to buy a 7-acre site or let's say a 10-acre site to only be able to use 4 acres of it.
Sure.
I have a question. So based on the design that has the 55% open space, which you're
Yeah,
talking about today, how many buildings?
This has a total of 9 projected buildings.
So, okay, so the 65% open space would theoretically take away 2?
Yep, I would say that's 2.
From my understanding?
2 or 3, what's that, I'm sorry?
So going from 9 buildings to 7?
Yeah,
Which is when you first bring it up and you're like, well, this is it at 55 or 65, it's 4 or it's 9. You're like, well, why? How are you quadrupling or more than doubling the project with the extra 10%? But right, so you could theoretically put 7 on there.
sure, okay.
Right,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
or
I
6 or 7,
Yeah,
and
6
and
or
the
7.
extra 10% gets you the additional 2 or 3. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So, that's that property, and I think when talking about this in regards to this particular property, I don't necessarily think that that's a overly it's an overreach necessarily. I guess my additional concern is on the second property and what would that do to the additional to that space, and I'm a little hesitant to
Personally,
do
not
anything
feeling,
on that right now without having a little more information on what it would potentially do to the other space. So I don't know if you guys have any more input on
Well, I would just say that the other space is limited in that it doesn't have sewer, it doesn't have water, so you're always going to have limitations to what
Gotcha.
can actually be on the site. Similar to this, you might get something similar in use because M1, there's not a ton of uses that you can't have a gas station, you can't have, apartment complexes or whatever the case. You're limited in use.
yeah.
And the other thing is that Highway 16 property it's visible from Highway 16, but there's really no residential areas around it. There's no residential from the town standpoint. It abuts, I think, a vacant field on Pewaukee side, and then the elevation.
Farms to the north.
The elevation kind of blocks it from Highway JK as well, so it's kind of a hidden from JK, but from the residential view, I guess.
Yeah.
But I guess, but just tagging on what you just said, but the word you said, visible, I think that's kind of key, that it is visible. I think it's kind of I don't want to say a prominent area, but I do find it kind of significant. My concern is what we do here, how that will affect that. So kind of echoing a couple things I've heard already. Because I really have been giving this a ton of thought because I know that we talked a little bit to Dan about how your job was to figure out what the other communities are doing, so, and that's good to know, but at the same token, I still go back, that's why I'd love to know, I hate to just keep giving away what, you know, our open space, and that's what makes us the town of Delafield, and I know we've been clicheing that a lot, but I am hesitant to just keep moving forward, you know, changing our open space requirements, especially on 16, we don't, and it's for sale, and it's, I feel like we'll have the opportunity to look at the items, but if we change it now, we'll never get it back.
But I guess, from my perspective regarding the Highway 16 property, I think us passing this evening will allow for a higher quality development instead of like a landscape yard or like a Sunbelt rental or something that I don't necessarily think the town would want on that parcel, given how prominent it is. I would think that, you know, high quality, you know, storage units or high quality, you know, like the toy boxes or whatever, you know, would be a much better, you know, use of that property than, like a Sunbelt rental or a place where, you know, you drive past, there's a place on your way to Madison and, you know, they've got their lift trucks and everything parked out there because it's open space, it's grass, you know, it's impervious surface, but they can still park their stuff out there. So I think that, you know, we're still significantly more restrictive than all of our neighbors combined, and way more restrictive than the county. And you know, I don't think the 10% is gonna necessarily make an, you know, big dent as far as like visually, like this property, you know, the extra buildings. You're not going to see them. They're going to be back behind the property. They're going to build the 4 buildings along the front, and I just think that it, you know, allows for a higher quality potential use for these properties. You know, we still need to grow our tax base, and I think storage units are lesser of two evils, so to speak. That we don't. I mean, they're not highly intensive uses. You know, you're not getting a lot of traffic, and it still generates pretty good tax base for the town.
I think if you do them correctly, I would say that's accurate, right? I mean, I remember there's some pretty substantial restrictions on the storage units that were done prior to this, right? As far as like in and out times and gates and businesses being operated from them and the like. But you know, I also agree with all that, right? Like, I'd rather you make it a better marketable piece of property too, right? I'm very, like, I guess my one, like, the one thing I'd kind of like to see before I make a decision is like the chunk of the lot that's for sale and a hypothetical of like difference in space that gets used. Right, like if we had the projected image of the development that was going to be there, right, and they say, okay, well, if they did the exact same thing with this new regulation, look, you'd add, I don't remember how many buildings they had. They had quite a bit, but
48 units.
48 units, right? So if they
Smaller units, obviously.
right,
But I mean,
but
it
if
was-
they say, okay, here's the 48 units. If we did this exact same thing, we'd have 8 more. Okay, well, 8 more, you know, 48, 8, you're not seeing a huge difference. But if it's, hey, we could have 48 units, and then we could also do 30 more, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to make the decision without being able to kind of visualize the amount of additional space that we're talking on that particular property, which I think if it's, and as you guys are more familiar with the property, may be able to say, look, you're talking the additional of couple thousand square feet of development, then I'm a little less
Yeah, it's
concerned about it.
clarifying, why is it making, it just clarifying, why is this 10% going to make it a better project? I mean, I guess just convince me. I mean,
Yeah.
that's.
I get it for the developers, right? Like you gotta make money to develop it.
It's not like, I get it,
Yep.
I'm afraid if we give it away, we'll never get it back. So I just want to make sure, because then you could do that, and then they're going to still have equipment sitting out in the yard, and we're going to think, okay, well, we did all that, and we're still, whoever we had in there is still putting their stuff out in the yard.
So I just want to address that a little bit. I
Yes,
mean, it's
please.
a discussion. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, you know, you know, at 65%, I've had a lot of people come in on the property that they're dealing, I shouldn't say a lot, probably less than a handful, but I mean, 2 or 3, 4 inquiries because it was for sale. And then I'd tell them, here's the code, and they'd go away pretty quick. You know, I'm assuming that land next to the car dealership has been vacant for as long as I've been here, 30 years, only because, or partly because it's been 65%. You know, there is no developer that wants to come in, you know, at 65%. Maybe they'll come in at 55, maybe not. But, you know, they're looking at, you know, maybe they're looking at Pewaukee or Heartland where they can get 30% open space. You know, so they can get more product on their properties in some other community. So you have the balance of, we can leave it vacant and it's not, you know, it's not a viable tax base, it's just a vacant piece of land, or is it, you know, do we reduce it down and make it a little bit more attractive? Maybe not. Maybe we're not selling ourselves to the
Right.
devil here with 30%, shall we say? But
That's my issue. It has to be consistent. So when we make a decision to give away, you know, open space like that, you have to basically apply the same decision to other people who are making similar requests, you know, no matter what the nature of the business is. It's not my job to make it more marketable.
yeah,
So I'm very uncomfortable approving this, honestly. You know, me and the high-density topic, I just love open space and green space, so that's where I stand.
I would just say that, you know, we have these zoned as M1, and as a staff, from a staff perspective at least, these are properties we want to see developed. They're not designated as spaces to be left open, which there's a lot of those in the town that's their land use. Land use and the zoning is expecting development, which is the reason why they are M1. So I guess there are areas where the land can be open, but we've designated this as a town to have it be developed in this way.
I think we've got 2 of these properties that are vacant, right? Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay,
The 2 corners of the town.
right.
Isn't there a third really quickly before you go, the We Energies building? Can we talk about that just a little bit? What if somebody came and they sold the building because we don't need energy anymore and we start over?
Then they would have to lessen their open space from what they have now, because right now they exceed.
Right.
And are based on the old code, so they'd actually have to remove some of their
I know we
hard
talked about,
slopes.
but it would be.
but that
the
could be
new-
redeveloped.
It would be
It definitely
redeveloped.
could be redeveloped, and then they would have to follow whatever code is in place, 55%, 65%.
But my point is, it's another property that could apply to, I'm sorry, I totally interrupted.
No. I was just saying I think and I don't know, this is totally out of the ballpark, but if there's 2 properties and I can have a visual of this is each property with 55% and 65% and what like that coverage of those spaces look like, it's a whole lot easier to be like, okay, that's reasonable, right?
I mean, based on the size of this property, we're talking 10 acres, right? So the difference between
Is it 10 or is it, did you say 7? 10.7. Oh, 10.7.
10.7. So the difference between 65% is 2/3 in my head, right? Approximately 2/3.
there's a little difference because part of that's county.
Yeah,
Well,
County's got a different
Yeah.
But-
Yeah.
amount of
Yeah.
green space,
But,
Right.
which is much less than what the township
Yeah,
yeah.
has. So we're trying halfway in between because
sure.
I want to clarify how we calculate the open space. So we do not do it just on the town portion of the zoning. We will look at the entire property for open space, okay? It's just too hard to say, well, you know, we want 65%, but only in the jurisdiction of the town. Okay, and that sets a bad precedent. And we've been working with the county, and the county does the same thing a lot, is if a portion of the property, just a single parcel is, you know, half town, half county, they'll look at their floor area ratio over the entire parcel. And we'll look at our open space over the entire parcel. So that's what the part about this one is that the part that's in the county's jurisdiction it's in shoreline zoning, which means it's near a creek, which means there's wetland, there's, there's not much you can do with that land because of the wetlands and the, I think there's some floodplain in there too, so. So, yeah, that land is gonna be open space.
And have
On
these been for sale for 30 years? Both these pieces? I mean, you said, well, I mean, well, obviously not the Cassandras, because it's newly for sale.
Well.
but Prior to that,
Prior to that, it was owned by a gentleman who owns a lot of property throughout Milwaukee, and he just never was motivated to do things. He had lots of ideas, but
Oh,
never,
but the
never-
bottom line is that property has gone through numerous iterations over the years, and
yeah,
some of the uses haven't necessarily been the best uses.
Correct.
And, you know, we're thankful that what's there now has been there for as long as it has, but it's not guaranteed that it's gonna be there forever.
When I bought the property,
You can
my
come up.
realtor said, it was up, they actually had a landscaper that wanted to buy it. Problem because of, he wanted parking outside and that type of thing, so he inquired about it.
right. Because we don't allow outside storage in M1. So any kind of contractor, or who'd you say, like the Sunbelt or something like that, they've been turned down. They'd say, because they want to park everything outside.
Our covenant said no out. If anybody parks a car out, I mean, they can park in front of the unit while they're there, but they, no outside parking at all.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, my gut feeling was, and especially after listening to the discussion at Plan Commission level, I was not in favor of giving open space, but I'm trying to help the town get tax base, so I'm trying to wrap my head around getting it better. So I'm not like I'm vehemently opposed, I'm just trying to see the benefits of it, which I'm listening.
I'm less concerned about
This one, it's the next
this.
one. It's the next one.
I just want to make sure that
Right.
I have an idea of what I'm looking at on everything else that we're.
I'm trying to pull it up in the.
Yeah, you're kind of coming at that now, you're getting tied into that, I hope you
I
understand that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think from a development perspective.
Yeah.
Again, if you've got a 10-acre site, and it's 65% green space requirement, that means 6.5 acres site are gonna be green. If you go to 55, then 5.5 acres are gonna be, so well over half the site. And again, you know, prior to working with John and doing this, I was a city manager. And it was an economic development in our community, so I know this world, and I think the concern would be, if not this, then what? And if not this, then what? It sounds like to me the answer for at least a long time, then what is nothing. And that comes back to the community kind of, values, and if that's okay, if the preference is nothing, then I think your answer is there. But if your preference is something, and we're here, this is something, and based on historical information that I've been picking up contextually through this conversation, it's not met jobs.
Yeah, I mean,
Not to say that that couldn't happen, it's not to say that that wouldn't happen, but it sounds like to me, people have been struggling to develop this site based on the regulations, and we also struggled with that. Bill kind of said, all right, based on conversations we had with Dan and Tim, there might be an avenue here. So I guess we are that something. And does it work? I don't know what else there would be. And again, it's okay if that's the wishes and will of the community, if that's the values of the community. Have open space over development, then I think your decision's made. But if the value of the community is let's have something, this I think is that something.
And it's a ground level storage facility,
So
so
I'm
not
sorry.
multiple level, correct?
No, and what I passed out, that's
Yeah, I saw that.
we do most of our
do you have
development.
the drawings from,
Most of the development that we have is in the Lake Geneva area, so it's.
drawings from the
there's all
office?
sorts of requirements for.
the other drawing?
You can see an outdoor fountain and all that stuff there, and that would be a similar type. Your architectural requirements are actually pretty stringent, which is a good thing, guys. And, you know, we're certainly that because, you know, reputation that John wants to uphold too. Bring brochures like that to other communities and say, look. But I wanted to share that with you from the Lake Geneva brochure to kind of give you a feel of at least what we're talking about here. It's not just a sheet metal building.
Yeah, and I don't think like I said, it's not for me, I'm not specifically, like you said, from the road, it's gonna look the same, that's all the same, you know, I get it, right? 6.5 acres of open space versus 5.5 acres of open space. As a developer, you maybe answer the same kind of question, right? So with that extra acre, right, what kind of size additional storage building are you getting? 2, 4? Like, you know, my concern is we make this change to approve, which again, if this applied to strictly this,
Yeah, I mean, that's why our first request was for a variance.
yeah, doesn't get my feathers too ruffled. What I don't know is, and maybe I'm just being oversensitive about it, but what I don't want to have happen is then we just like massively increased the capacity on the additional property. And I guess that's the only.
The other
answer I'm
property is
offering.
11.3 acres, so it's actually pretty similar size to this.
And
so figure their proposed plan was to basically max that out. They had 67% open space. Granted, their retention area, I believe, was on a different lot, correct, Tim? Correct. So, if you can kind of figure what that design was to add an additional 10% of use to what they had. And
So if
on
they had
so on a
48
it'd be what, just over 1 acre.
So if they had 48 units and you're adding 10%, what's that?
5 more units.
It's 5 to
Yeah, it would
7
probably
more
be
units or
another
something.
building or something.
Well, and note that obviously talking about the other property, we will have the chance still, whatever we do here, we will still always have, even if we
Yeah.
do, we'll still have the chance to look at it and make our,
And that makes me, I guess
that
makes me
feel better too.
less
I mean,
concerned about it. Yeah.
Ultimately, it's here as a policy decision, if we want to, you know, I mean, these properties, these M1 properties have been identified in the land use plan to be properties that we want development on, and I don't feel as if we as a town are, you know, giving away the farm by, you know, reducing this by 10%, but if it allows these properties to be developed at a higher quality, I support it, so.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm all for getting some development and moving and stuff, and it's a little, when you're talking, okay, when we're at 10% additional, right, a little less concerning than doubling the project, which is kind of how, when it's like, you know, like first kind of came out, it was like, okay.
I know, it's too vague. What is the impact to our tax base? I mean, that's really a vague question, and I know. we
It's
can't
very
really-
vague. It depends on what the assessment is of each building. I mean,
Right.
if you have,
We are planning on doing what I did in Lake Geneva, which good thing for your tax base, because some of these buildings will be sold. In other words, they'll be condo.
Yep, yeah, it was starting at 75 to 130, I think.
And so a building, like for example, that 12,000 square foot building, that first one we'll put up, would you, probably about 350,000 in tax base for building it, for what I'll get. And that should probably be about 1.5 million in tax base once they're sold. Units. Does that make sense, you guys?
Mhm.
So there's quite a bit more tax than just rental,
Right,
like the ones the other side of We Energy
Right.
that are just rental.
rental, yeah.
If we actually sell each one of them units, 10 units in a building, probably about 1.5 million in tax base as compared to 350, which the building is.
Okay, thank you.
At least that's what
Yeah,
they were.
all right.
So that will increase the tax base by quite a bit.
Right.
on 8 or 9 buildings.
What percentage do you sell? What percentage are you selling in the mall, or
Right
what?
now, at Lake Geneva, I was gonna only sell 4 buildings. We also have 9 buildings there. And I sold all 4, all 4 of the buildings, or 40 units got sold. So my realtor, I had to go through back and take what was gonna be rental and do an addendum, or amendment, excuse me, a plot map done for the other units. So right now, we're probably gonna be selling up to 75% of the units.
And the average is 350? Did I hear you
The
correct
average
on?
building that is getting taxed right now is about 350, but we're bringing probably the 150 of a unit, which would be about, in 10 units, would be about $1.5 million.
So what John's saying is if they were left as rental, they're generally valued at about $350. Condominiumize them, the value exponentially increases.
Yeah,
Just be like having a duplex.
Yeah.
You know, a 2-unit
That's
duplex
common.
versus a 2-unit condo, where each side is independently owned.
Yeah, so, but each one of these has to have their own tax key.
yeah.
It's just like a subdivision.
Yep.
Yeah.
Plat map, declarations. You guys are gonna go through it, you're gonna ask, oh, nobody was gonna live in these. No, nobody, we got 5 different areas in our declarations that we won't allow people to live on. They'll get fined if they did, because that was a big concern.
But you plan on renting those units long-term?
Some down the road might get rented, but we're gonna start trying to sell them. And we even actually got, what is the local magazine in Oconomowoc, it's like this.
Enterprise? Oh,
Well,
Lake Country.
Neighbor, Blue,
Blue Magazine
Media,
or-
Best Version Media,
Yeah.
Best
Okay,
Version
it comes
Media.
out once a year, and we put an
Oh.
ad in there, because we bought the land, my realtor did, and she's already had like several calls on it, people wanting to buy. Now, I don't know if that's gonna happen,
right.
but they just would rather buy than to keep constantly paying me the rent.
Makes sense.
I don't know if you mentioned, sorry, just one more question.
Go ahead.
The size of each unit is how many square feet?
There'll be various, but usually about 10 to 12, like anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. And that price will vary. They're usually about $1.50 a square foot is what we sell them for.
Okay,
If that makes sense.
okay.
As you can see that, renting them, we could bring in approximately another 800,000 for each building for tax base.
Staff have anything else they'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the questions as far as total impact, I mean, I'm less concerned about that, knowing the size of the other property and knowing what the potential development was and adding 10% to that, that's less of a concern to me. So I think we reasonably did our due diligence, right?
I did a quick calculation, so.
Yep.
I won't do it, but probably would look like, so do you remember? those
Yep.
that were gonna be put up?
Are we talking about Cassandra's? Are we talking
Toy
about?
box, yeah.
Cassandra's,
By
yeah.
Cassandra's, yeah.
The toy box.
Yep, okay.
And they were, basically, you probably would be looking at like 12, 13 more of each individual garage plus the. About a
2 more buildings then.
25% increase
Yep.
in units.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's not doubling it, right? Right? Like, so that's, right, we're not shoehorning stuff onto the property, and that's, I think that was kind of my concern. So, I mean, I'm a little more at ease, a better understanding what that image is, and that is, so. Any other?
No, I have kind of, I mean, what we're doing, what I need, I wanted to just talk through it some, because I'm more open to it coming in now, listening a little bit more, especially because if we approved it, my rationale would be to make use of this space versus having it remain vacant, which is what it's been. And that would be what the town wants, because these were our developable spaces.
I don't know if it gets too far into this project specifically, but I don't know if you guys saw some of the other, like, landscape and berm and requirement portions of the other, so.
Yeah, we wrote that storage unit ordinance very specifically, so.
It'll be under a conditional use, so they'll have a public hearing.
conditional use, so you'll have.
To our advantage to make it look good. Buying these, expect that.
Right.
That's one of the other benefits of selling it, is there's a vested interest from the property. Marketable, we have to make them. Lit. Has fountains and fencing and, you know.
We wanna also have big parking lots, so they're not in like, some of these, I have some storage units that have little driveways. These are all 50, 60, 70-foot driveways, so they can get their RVs or their boats out without. That's, again, takes a lot of different, additional space, but part of it, if you wanna do these, that's what you got.
Right. Well, I'd move to adopt the ordinance or amend section 17.045M5D of the zoning code to reduce the open space requirement in the M1 zoning district from 65% to 55%.
Second? Second it. There's a motion on the floor to approve the amending this M1 zoning district from 65% open space to 55% open space. All in favor say aye.
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 I abstain.
It passes 3-0 with one abstention. Next item, recommendation to adopt the ordinance 20-24-07, ordinance to remove section 17.10.5.h titled Protest to comply with the Wisconsin state statutes.
Just 1 second. Just so you guys know, this does have to go to Waukesha County for approval because of the zoning code, so figure another 1.5 to 2 month process, so.
It's not Walmart, no. You didn't say that.
Let me see this, what's there?
Thank you, though, I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So.
Protest petition.
Yeah, so this is an ordinance that we had talked about earlier this year that we wanted to wait until the summer of this year to move forward. This is based on state statutes that were adopted last year that no longer had protest petitions be viable for zoning changes, land use amendments, things like that. So starting January 1 of 2025, our ordinance would not be in compliance. So a protest petition basically would be useless if filed. So we're looking to remove it from the code. So it puts the town in compliance with state statutes. And this was discussed almost a year ago, I think. It was brought
It's
forward.
just, it's time, that's really basically
Yeah,
what
it's
it's
gonna
come
take
down
2
to.
months again to get through the county, so we'll be at November, December by the time it gets approved.
So I motion to amend the town zoning code to remove section 17.105 H titled protest to comply with Wisconsin state statutes.
Second.
Motion is second to remove section titled Protest to comply with the state statutes. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next item, discussion and possible action on independent contractor agreement with Sean's Deer Pickup for a flat rate monthly fee for deer removal in the town of Delafield. Administrator Green, I believe this is your item.
Sure, so our contract with Sean's Deer Pickup expired in September. And I have been in email correspondence with Sean. regarding the next contract, he is no longer doing per deer costs. He says it's not viable for his company with his costs going way up. So every contract that he's in negotiations with he's trying to do a flat fee. So his flat fee that he proposed to us was a little higher. I worked him down to what is in front of you now at $420 a month, which equates to just over $5,000 a year. And this would be for unlimited deer removal throughout the town. It varies as far as how many deer we deal with each year. Some years it could be 20, some years it could be 10. It really fluctuates depending on what type of winter we have, what kind of summer we have. I think we're going to continue to see increased deer numbers, to be honest, so I think we're going to keep seeing more of these. And the bottom line is Sean's pretty much the only
Oh, we
show
don't
in
have
town,
many
you
options,
know.
huh?
Yeah, there aren't a lot of options
No
on
one
the
wants to
table.
do this
These
as
are
a job.
the
And
only-
does it, how do I ask this nicely? Does it matter when he gets called? Like, does it happen like when it just happens, or maybe it just gets
When it's-
noticed
when
after
it's
a month or
found.
two kind of thing? where it's
Typically,
pretty
right-of-way
nasty?
deers will be found pretty quick, whether it's by our highway department or if it's by a resident, they usually call pretty quick. And our highway guys, because they drive around the town so much, they're usually the ones to notify us. I think in the contract, it actually says that the the highway superintendent is the one that's gonna initiate that process. The value in this contract is we no longer have to track every deer and get invoiced for every deer. We just know
Yeah, it's gonna
he'll
get
take
done.
care of it.
Is this though, is it like anywhere, or just if it's around a road right away?
It's
Might be a dumb
in,
question,
it's
I
in
just-
road right of way.
Not your property,
Road right away.
not your property.
Tends to be that people,
fun.
if it's in your property, sometimes it happens to make its way to the right of way. I don't know how that happens.
Oh, it happens. No, trust me. No,
I wonder why.
that's, okay, so that was my question, is there's, we just as a town don't help our residents out if one dies in their yard. We still
No.
just say,
You don't have the proper,
I've lived it, so I know we don't help them out, but
Right.
I'm just wondering why not?
Capacity to.
if it's in their yard, it's their property. They can certainly call Sean and he'll pick it up, but it's a charge on the property owner. If we had to pay for all of those deer,
Okay,
that cost would
Be a
be
budgetary issue.
huge.
so they just have to get yanked out to the road right away.
Yeah,
And
I
then-
mean, people, I'm sure, dispose of deer in their own way in many cases, but if, from a town's perspective, we have to do it in the proper way that the DNR requires.
Okay.
And so that's why we contract with him.
So road right away, any public road, no private road right away either, just it has to be a public.
Public road right away, yeah. So these would be town roads.
roads.
And the county
The town-
already contracts with Sean to take care of roads on 83, KE, 18, those kind of things, so.
Okay.
Again, I don't really see any other choice. About 3 years ago, I looked into, I think I found one other company after searching all over the place, and it was over $500 back in 2021
Okay.
for one deer, so,
For one deer?
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't even know if that company is still in business, but I didn't want to even bother checking what the price was at this point, so.
No, you answered my question about the private property. That was what I was just asking about. Okay.
Motion
But-
to approve the independent contract agreement with Sean's deer pickup for flat monthly rate fee, $420 a month.
A
Second.
second?
Motion is second to approve the contract with Sean's Deer Pickup. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Next item, discussion possible action on setting up a budget workshop meeting date.
Given Supervisor Mahoney Ogden is not available for the first meeting in October, I would suggest the second meeting in October. I don't have that date on the top of my head. I want to say it's the
22nd?
Second. Yep.
Yeah.
22nd.
Yep.
Sounds good with me.
And that will be at 5:30, and then I'll set the town board for that night for the
Put it after.
immediately following.
You'll send an email and let Steve know too.
Yep.
Yeah, just you.
Next items, We have a town board meeting on the 24th. Plan commission on October 1st. Is it the rezone? And then we may or may not have a town board on the 8th. Next item, be a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
A second.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned 4-0.
They can just swing.
And it worked great.